Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you about sentence word order in English. This is a very highly requested video by a lot of students. I suppose for you to be able to construct a grammatically correct sentence in English, it is important to understand the correct word order in English. Now, let us look at some rules. Rule number 1. First, you have the subject. So, when you're constructing a sentence in English, first you have the subject. And the subject is who. It could be the name of a person, okay? It could be just a pronoun like he, she, it, okay? So, first you have the subject. Then after that, you write the verb. The verb is the action, like see, play, cook, eat. All those are examples of verbs. And then you have the direct object. The direct object receives the verb. For example, in the sentence, Jack kicked the ball. Jack kicked the ball. Jack is the subject. Kicked is the verb. And the ball is the direct object. Jack kicked the ball. Subject Jack. Verb kicked. The ball, the direct object. Okay? Then you have the place. Okay? The place answers the question where. And then finally, you have the time. So when you're constructing a sentence in English, first you write the subject, then you write the verb, then you write the direct object, then you write the place, and finally you write the time. How do you do that? Let's look at the examples 1 on the right. 1a. My sister saw many weddings last year. My sister saw many weddings last year. My sister is the subject, that is S. Then you write the verb. The verb is saw. And then you write the direct object, and that is many weddings. And then finally you write the time, okay? That is when. It is last year. So you always have to remember to follow this sentence structure every single time you're constructing a sentence in English. First write the subject, then the verb, then the direct object, then write the place, and then write the time. Now, obviously, some sentences may not have the time, some sentences may not have the place, and also some sentences may not have a direct object. Not all sentences have time. Not all sentences have a direct object. Not all sentences have place. But all sentences have a subject and a verb. Okay? And in that case, ensure that you follow the correct order. Okay? Example 1b. She likes Agatha Christie. She likes Agatha Christie. You have she is the subject, likes is the verb, and then you have Agatha Christie is the direct object. So usually a sentence in its simplest form, okay, what we call a simple sentence, because in English we have three types of sentences. We have simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. If you're more curious, you want to know more about that, which can be extremely useful in writing, then have a look at my playlist on grammar. I have a video on the three types of sentence structures. Okay, so a sentence in its simplest form, which is a simple sentence, has at least a subject, a verb, and a direct object. Okay? So in that case, always remember first to write the subject, and then write the verb, and then write your direct object. Now, let us look at sentence 1C. She doesn't go out to discourse on Saturday. She doesn't go out to discourse on Saturday. So she is the subject because she is the person who's doing the action. Okay, the subject is the person who is doing the action or what we are talking about, that is who. Then you have doesn't go out, that is a verb. You have several verbs there. And then to discuss is the place. And then you have time, which is on Saturday. Okay, so subject comes first. Then you write the verb, then you write the place, and then you write the time. Now, let us look at example 1D. I used to watch television in my room at bedtime. I used to watch television in my room at bedtime. In that sentence, you also have a subject, which is I. Used to watch, you have the verbs there. And then you have television, which is the direct object. The easiest way to remember a direct object is the thing that receives an action. Okay, it is an object. It is what receives the action. I used to watch television. So the television is watched. Okay. In my room is the place. And at bedtime is the time. Okay, so place is where something is happening, where it's taking place. And time is when. And obviously the verb is the action. And the subject is the person who's actually doing the action. Okay, so before we move to rule number 2, remember rule number 1. Subject plus the verb plus the direct object plus the place plus the time. So every time you construct a sentence in English, remember to write the subject first, then the verb, and then the direct object, and then the place, and then the time. And if a sentence does not have place, but it has time, then remember it is subject, verb, direct object, and then time. Okay? Now, let us move on to rule number 2. The verbs should be often next to each other. So, when you're constructing a sentence in English and you have more than one verb, you should try and put them next to each other. Okay, you should try and put them next to each other. A good example is 1C. She doesn't go out to discourse on Saturday. You have the verbs doesn't, and then you have the verbs go out. Okay, she doesn't. Okay, she does not go out. But then also look at example 1D. You have two verbs there. I used to watch television in my room at bedtime. You have the verb used and you have the verb watch. So when you have two verbs in a sentence, then try and put them next to each other. Now look at example 2. I have lived here since 1980. I have lived here since 1980. You have the verb have and you have the verb lived. I have lived. Okay? So, when you have more than one verb, you have two verbs, for example, try to make sure that the verbs are next to each other, that you write them next to each other. Obviously, try and also use the correct prepositions and ensure that the verbs are in the correct tense. Let's move on to rule number 3. In questions, the verb comes before the subject. In questions, the verb comes before the subject. Normally, the subject comes first all the time when you're constructing a sentence in English. However, in questions, when you want to write a question, when you want to formulate a question, then the verb comes before the subject. Okay, remember that. If you want to write a question, make sure that the verb comes before the subject. How do you do that? Look at example 3a. Can you ask your sister all kinds of things? Can you ask your sister all kinds of things? So that's a question. Okay? That is a question. And you can see in that case, the verb comes before the subject. The verb is can. And the subject is you, because that is a pronoun. So in that sentence, can you ask your sister all kinds of things? First you have the verb, which is can, and then you have the subject, which is you. You is a pronoun. So in that case, the pronoun you is the subject in that sentence. Okay? So in that case, the verb comes first. And then in the next sentence, does she know all the answers? Does she know all the answers? So in that case, once more, you have the verb coming first, and the verb is does. And then the subject comes after the verb. The subject is she. She is a pronoun, and a pronoun is always a subject. If you're not very familiar with pronouns, I have also made a video about pronouns. You should be able to find it in my playlist under grammar. The playlist is titled Grammar. You should be able to find that video there on pronouns. Okay, so remember that you want to write a question, make sure that the verb comes before the subject. Rule number 4. Rule number 4 is that rule number 3, that is, in questions, the verb comes before the subject. It does not apply. That rule does not apply when the subject of the question is who, what, which, or how many. So if you want to begin your sentence with the following words, you want to begin your sentence with who, what, which, or how many. When you want to do that, then in that case, the verb does not come before the subject. I repeat, if you want to begin your question, okay, you want to formulate a question, you want to write a question that is going to begin with who, what, which, or how many, okay? If you want to do that, then the verb does not come before the subject. Let us look at example 4. Who wants to learn all these things? Who wants to learn all these things? So you see, who comes first, and in that case, who is the subject of that question. And then what comes next? The verb. Okay? So when you want to begin your sentence, your question, you want to write a question and you want to begin it with who, or with what, or with which, or with how many, then remember the verb comes immediately after. who wants to learn all these things? First you have who, which is the subject of the question, and then you have want, which is a verb. So in that case, the subject comes before the verb. Okay? But when you want to begin a sentence with words like can or does or could, okay, or will, if you want to begin your questions with any of those words, then remember rule number 3 applies. The verb comes before the subject. Let us move on to rule number 5. Rule number 5. Time indicators can also come at the beginning of a sentence, but in questions, they always come at the end. So, remember rule number 1. We said that time, that is when, that part of your sentence which answers the question when, we said that it always comes first. That is rule number 1. But according to rule number 5, time can also come at the beginning of a sentence. Okay? So time can also come at the beginning of a sentence. But in questions, if you want to ask a question, then time comes always at the end. Okay? So time can come at the beginning of a sentence or at the end of a sentence. But when you want to ask a question, then it must always come at the end. Now, I have some examples for you to illustrate that. Look at examples 5. A. Last year, my sister read a lot of books. Last year, my sister read a lot of books. Now, if you look at that sentence, the time comes first because that's last year. And then we have my sister, who is the subject. And then read is the verb, and a lot of books is the direct object. So in that sentence, time comes first, and that sentence is absolutely grammatically correct. Last year, my sister read a lot of books. And then look at example B, the same sentence. My sister read a lot of books last year. In that sentence, time comes at the very end of the sentence. Okay? So, time can come at the beginning or at the end of a sentence. And then look at example C. Doesn't she go out in the weekends? Doesn't she go out in the weekends? That should be a question. So there should be a question mark at the end. I'm sorry, I forgot to write that, okay? Doesn't she go out in the weekends? That's a question. So, in that question, time comes at the end, okay? Remember the rule. In questions, time must always come at the end. Doesn't she go out in the weekends? That's a question. So, time comes at the end of that sentence. Look at example, rule number 6. Let's move on to rule number 6. So I hope rule number 5 is clear, okay? You want to start to construct a sentence in English. The time indicator, so the part of your sentence that answers the question when, it can come at the beginning of a sentence or it can come at the very end of the sentence. However, if you want to construct a question, you want to ask a question, then remember, time comes at the end of the sentence always. Let us move on to rule number 6. Rule number 6. There are special rules for these adverbs. Okay, so we have some specific adverbs, and when it comes to those adverbs, there are special rules when you're constructing a sentence using them. And what is an adverb? An adverb is a word that describes a verb. An adverb explains how an action was done. He spoke slowly. Slowly is an adverb because it's explaining how he spoke. Okay? He ate quickly. Quickly is an adverb because it's explaining more about how he ate. Okay? So an adverb is a verb. An adverb is a word that describes a verb. An adverb tells us how a particular action was actually done. So there are special rules for the following adverbs: always, never, occasionally, often, seldom, sometimes, usually, already, even, ever, just, still, almost, only, completely, hardly, nearly, quite, just, certainly, definitely, obviously, probably, also, and really. So when it comes to these adverbs, if you want to use them to construct a sentence in English, there are special rules, and they are: A. Look at number 6A. When you have only one verb in the sentence, the adverb comes before that verb. So if you have only one verb in your sentence, the adverb must come before that verb. How do you do that? Look at example 6A. I have two examples there for you. My sister often reads crime novels. My sister often reads crime novels. Now, in that sentence, we have the adverb often, and it comes before the verb reads. Okay? My sister often reads crime novels. So in that sentence, we have the adverb often, and it comes before the verb read. Look at the next example. She just loves Agatha Christie's books. She just loves Agatha Christie's book. So you have the adverb just, and it comes before the verb loves. Okay? Let's move on to rule number 6B. When you have any form of the verb to be in the sentence, the adverb comes after. When you have any form of the verb to be in the sentence, the adverb comes after. So remember, in a sentence where we have any form of the verb to be, the adverb comes after that verb. Let's look at examples B. He is also very clever. He is also very clever. Okay? We have is. Is an example or a form of the verb to be. Is. So because of that, the adverb comes after the verb. Is an example of a form of the verb to be. So because of that, the adverb also comes after the verb. Look at the next example. We are almost there. We are almost there. In that sentence, we have are. Are is an example of the form of the verb to be, and because of that, the adverb almost comes after the verb. Okay? So when you have any form of the verb to be in the sentence, the adverb comes after the verb. Now, let's look at rule 6C. When you have two verbs in a sentence, the adverb comes after the first verb. So if you're writing a sentence, you want to construct a sentence in English, and you want to have two verbs in your sentence, but also you want to have an adverb, then the adverb must come after the first verb. Look at example 6C. He has completely reassured me. He has completely reassured me. In that sentence, we have two verbs, has and reassured. And what happens? The adverb completely comes after the first verb, which is has. Okay? He has completely reassured me. In that sentence, you have two verbs, that is has and reassured. And the adverb completely comes after the first verb. Let's look at the next sentence, next example. I know you can't always be bothered to answer my questions. I know you can't always be bothered to answer my questions. Okay? In that sentence, you also have more than one verb. You have no, but also you have bothered. Okay? You have two verbs, no and bothered. And because of that, the adverb always comes after the first verb, which is no. Okay? Now, let's move on to the last rule. In questions, the adverb comes after the subject. So when you want to ask a question in English, or when you want to construct or to write a question in English, the adverb comes after the subject. Okay? How do you do that? Let's look at the examples on the right. Examples 6D. I have two examples there for you. Is she really on her own? Is she really on her own? Is she really on her own? Now, in that sentence, you notice that first of all, it is a question. And because of that, the adverb really comes immediately after the subject. And the subject in that sentence is she, because she is a pronoun. Okay? It is what the subject is. It is what the sentence is talking about. The subject is what the sentence is actually talking about, and it is talking about she. Is she really on her own? The adverb comes after the subject she. Look at the next sentence. Do you never read? Do you never read? Do you never read? Do you never read? Okay? Now, that is a question. In that question, you notice once more, the adverb never comes after the subject you. Okay? The adverb never comes after the subject you. So, this brings me to the end of this lesson. Remember, when you want to construct a sentence in English, the subject comes first, then the verb, then the direct object, then the place, and the time. Verbs should always come as next to each other. If you have more than one verb, try and put the verbs next to each other. Thirdly, in questions, remember the verb comes before the subject. But that does not apply when the subject of the question is, if you have a question that begins with who, what, which, or how many, that does not apply. Number 5, time indicators. Okay, that part of your sentence that answers the question when can also come at the beginning of a sentence or at the end of the sentence. But in questions, they always come at the end. And then remember the special rules when it comes to using adverbs to construct a sentence. When you have only one verb in your sentence, then make sure that the adverb comes before that verb. And when you have any form of the verb to be in the sentence, make sure the adverb comes after the verb. And when you have two verbs in a sentence, make sure that the adverb comes after the first verb. And finally, when you want to construct a sentence in English and you want to use an adverb, make sure that the adverb comes after the subject. Okay, And this brings me to the end of this lesson. Have you learned anything new? Did you find the lesson useful? Have you found the lesson informative? Now, if you answered yes to any of those questions, then subscribe to the channel, become part of the family, and share this video with your friends, your family, and anybody else who needs it. And give this video a thumbs up to encourage me to keep making more videos to help you improve with your level of English. Thank you very much and see you in my next lesson. Bye bye.